Am I that ass for not helping my daughter? 2 years ago, my relationship with my daughter, who is now 22, fell apart. Watching her walk away from our bond was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced as a parent. It all started when she began dating a man I instantly recognized as trouble. He came on strong, showering her with attention and isolating her from her friends and family. Classic red flags. I tried to warn her, but she didn't want to hear it. Soon, she dropped out of college against my pleas and moved in with him. I begged her to reconsider, to think about the future she was throwing away, but she refused to listen and, in the process, cut me off completely. She blocked my number and made it clear she didn't want me involved in her life. From that point on, I could only watch from a distance as her world began to crumble. I learned through family members that my daughter's life with her boyfriend was far from the fairy tale she'd envisioned. The love of her life turned out to be a nightmare, cheating on her repeatedly and refusing to work while she struggled to keep their household afloat. She was working 2 jobs, trying to support herself and their 1-year-old twins, while her friends, the same ones she abandoned, were graduating college and starting corporate careers. The occasional updates I got were painful to hear, but what hurt more was that my daughter never reached out to me directly. Instead, she'd asked mutual family members to request money from me on her behalf. Then came the final blow, a screenshot of a Facebook post where she ranted about me. She called me an asshole for not stepping up to help her and accused me of not supporting her college education like her friends' parents had. It was like a slap in the face. I had done everything I could to set her up for success, and she threw it all away. Still, I wondered, was I wrong for not reaching out? Should I have done more? After reading that Facebook post, I decided it was time to address everything head-on. I sent a message to my daughter through a family member, inviting her to my house for dinner. To my surprise, she agreed to come, and she brought her brother, my son, with her. That evening, I told them both it was an open forum where we could air our grievances and try to sort things out. My daughter wasted no time expressing her anger. She said she hated me for not trying harder to reach out after she moved in with her boyfriend. She also accused me of never accepting him. I explained my perspective. She had chosen to drop out of college and be an adult, and her decision to block me sent a clear message that she didn't want me around. As for her boyfriend, I admitted that I couldn't accept someone who had cheated on her multiple times and refused to contribute financially or emotionally to their family. It disgusted me to see her with someone who treated her so poorly. My son also had his grievances. He was upset that I hadn't given him the extra money I'd saved for my daughter's college after she dropped out. He suggested I should have either given it to him or to her when she got pregnant. I reminded him that I had already paid for his college education and he graduated debt-free. As for my daughter, I had redirected her and used college fund into my retirement savings, because being an adult means taking responsibility for your own decisions. After they spoke their piece, it was my turn. I told them how deeply disappointed I was, not just in their choices, but in the way they had treated me. I reminded my daughter of all the sacrifices I had made to give her a good life, how she was my little princess, and how I had hoped she'd never have to face the kind of hardship she was now enduring. But she had made her choices, and this was the reality she had chosen. I also expressed my disappointment in my son for cutting me off when I had tried to maintain a relationship with him. I had always tried to do right by both of them, but their actions left me feeling unappreciated and disrespected. Despite the heavy emotions, we managed to remain civil. Then they dropped a bombshell. They suggested I get a reverse mortgage so they could receive their inheritance early to buy homes of their own. I was floored. I told them I'd think about it, but inside, I was struggling to process their audacity. That dinner was a wake-up call. It made me realize how much bitterness had built up in our relationships and how entitled my children had become. I love them both deeply, but I also know I can't sacrifice my own well-being for their mistakes. I'm still grappling with whether I should reach out further or hold my ground. A part of me aches to help my daughter, especially knowing she's struggling to provide for her twins. But another part of me knows that enabling her won't help her in the long run. She made her choices, and as much as it hurts, she has to face the consequences. As for my son, I hope he comes to understand that I did my best for both of them. Redirecting my daughter's unused college fund wasn't an act of punishment. It was a necessary step to secure my future. I've realized that sometimes, loving your children means letting them figure things out on their own. It's not easy, and it doesn't feel good, but it's the only way they'll truly learn. Whether they see that or not, I'll always hope for the best for them. But for now, I have to focus on protecting my peace. Am I that ass for not letting my in-laws drive my infant without a car seat? Parenting comes with countless decisions that test your boundaries, and recently, I found myself at odds with my in-laws over something that should have been non-negotiable: my child's safety. My son is 11 months old, and my wife's parents, while generally decent people, have some old-school habits that clash with modern safety standards. They believe that strapping a baby into a seatbelt, propped up on a stack of towels, is perfectly fine for car rides. According to them, it worked for my wife when she was little, and she turned out fine. But as far as I'm concerned, that logic doesn't hold. The risks are undeniable, and I refuse to let my son travel in their car without a proper car seat. My firm stance caused tension. My wife, trying to keep the peace, suggested I let it go, but I couldn't. To me, this wasn't just a matter of preference. It was about protecting my child. Frustrated but determined to address the issue, I called my father-in-law and offered to buy them a car seat. I told him I'd set it up in their car myself to make it easy for them. He said he'd think about it. Minutes later, my wife stormed in, furious. Apparently, my father-in-law had called her, complaining that I'd gone behind her back. She called me names I won't repeat and stormed out of the house. I was left reeling. How had this escalated so quickly? My wife's loyalty to her parents was clear, but I was just as committed to my son's safety. For a moment, I wondered if I was being unreasonable. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The next morning, I bought a car seat and installed it in my in-laws' car. My father-in-law was grumpy but seemed to tolerate it. I felt hopeful that we'd reached a compromise. That evening, as I pulled into the driveway after work, I saw my in-laws pulling up with my son. Something about my father-in-law's smug expression made my stomach sink. I walked over to their car and opened the door. My worst fears were confirmed. My son wasn't in the car seat. Instead, he was perched on a stack of towels, strapped in with a seatbelt, and covered with a blanket. I lost it. Furious, I told them they'd never see their grandson again. After they left, I called the non-emergency police line to report what had happened. They told me I could file a formal report, and I planned to do just that. My wife begged me not to file charges, saying it would destroy her relationship with her parents. But for me, it wasn't just about the relationship, it was about the principle. They had blatantly disregarded my child's safety, even after I'd gone out of my way to provide a solution. I told my wife I was going to the police station regardless, and she began threatening divorce. Before I left, my father-in-law called, asking to talk. We had a long conversation where he tried to explain his perspective, claiming it was how he'd been raised. While I understood his cultural background, it didn't excuse putting my son in danger. In the end, I made it clear. If they wanted any relationship with their grandson, they would follow the rules. No exceptions. After much back and forth, my in-laws begrudgingly agreed to use the car seat, though their attitude remained tense. My wife apologized for her outburst, admitting she struggled to go against her parents, but ultimately agreed with me about the importance of our son's safety. While it felt like a small victory, the situation left a sour taste. Moving forward, I remain cautious. While my son's safety comes first, navigating the delicate balance between protecting him and maintaining family harmony is proving to be a challenge. One thing is certain, though, I won't back down when it comes to keeping my child safe, no matter how uncomfortable it makes others.
Am I that for ending things with my parents over their estate? Growing up, my parents always claimed they treated my brother and me equally. I'm 24 and my brother is 32. From an outsider's perspective, that might have seemed true during our childhood. But as adults, the disparity in how we're treated has become glaringly obvious, and it's hard not to feel like I've always been the afterthought. My brother, let's just say, has struggled to launch. He didn't excel in school, never went to college, and failed out of 2 different trade schools my parents paid for. Welding didn't stick. Mechanics didn't stick. These days, he works at a gas station and frequently struggles to pay his rent or bills. Despite this, my parents have always been there to bail him out, giving him loans that everyone knows will never be repaid. Meanwhile, I've worked for everything I have. I joined the military at 17, knowing I'd need a way to support myself because my parents made it clear I was on my own after high school. While serving, I earned an associate's degree, then used my GI Bill to get my bachelor's. Now, I'm working on my master's degree and building a stable life with my husband. We've bought a house and started thinking about having kids. Life hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of where I am. The unequal treatment was always frustrating, but I mostly tried to let it go. What pushed me over the edge was when my parents told us about their will. They're in their 60s now, not particularly old, but their health isn't great. They sat us down to explain their plans for their estate, and that's when they dropped the bombshell. They're leaving almost everything to my brother. Their reasoning? He needs it more than you do. I was floored. It wasn't just about the money, though that stung too, but about what their decision said. To me, it felt like a confirmation of what I'd suspected all along. They care more about him than they do about me. To add insult to injury, they wanted me to manage their estate and be their medical power of attorney, essentially handling all the responsibilities while getting almost none of the benefits. I told them I was done. If they wanted to give my brother everything, fine. But I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up after them when they were gone. I refused to be their executor or medical power of attorney and told them to sort it all out themselves. Things escalated quickly after that conversation. My mom had a doctor's appointment and asked me for a ride since she's no longer able to drive. I told her to ask her favorite child or pay for an Uber. She looked stunned. My brother even called to apologize. He said he didn't want me to be mad at him, and I assured him I wasn't. This wasn't his fault. My anger was directed squarely at our parents for how they'd chosen to treat us. It wasn't about the money. It was about the blatant disparity in their support and care. I decided to confront my parents directly. I explained how their actions made me feel, going all the way back to when I had to join the military at 17 because I knew they wouldn't help me with college. I reminded them how they had refused to offer any financial support for my education, wedding, or life in general, all while bragging about their $1 million savings and bailing my brother out every chance they got. But they didn't get it. They interrupted me repeatedly, dismissing my feelings and insisting I was an adult who didn't need their help. They said I should be grateful for how independent I've become and implied that I was selfish for not stepping up to help them now. Their lack of understanding made it clear there was no point in continuing the conversation. I told them I didn't want anything from them, not now, not in the future. I asked them to remove me from their will entirely and hire a professional estate executor and caregiver because I wouldn't be filling those roles. When my mom asked if I would really put them in a nursing home, I countered with, "Would you really let your 17-year-old daughter join the military, knowing the risks, just to pay for school because you refuse to help?" Their response? Tears and yelling. But I stood my ground. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't going to keep fighting for scraps of their love and approval. Walking away from my parents was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but also one of the most freeing. For years, I carried the weight of trying to earn their respect and affection, but now I realize I don't need it. I have a loving husband, a stable life, and a bright future. My parents can spend their savings however they like. I hope they use it to secure the care they'll need in the future because I won't be there to provide it. I don't regret my decision. In fact, I feel lighter than I have in years. As for my brother, I genuinely hope he finds his way. None of this is his fault, and I don't hold any resentment toward him. But I've realized that I can't keep sacrificing my own peace to make up for my parents' favoritism. Life is too short to carry that kind of burden. At the end of the day, I'm choosing to focus on the family I'm building, not the one I've left behind. It may not be the ending anyone hoped for, but it's the one that brings me peace. And that, to me, is enough. Am I that for calling off my wedding over a shocking secret? For 5 years, my fiancé and I had been building a life together. Let's call him Heisenberg, his idea, of course, since he's a huge Breaking Bad fan. Things between us had always felt steady, almost perfect. We spent all of 2024 planning our dream wedding, pouring our hearts into every detail. From the venue to the guest list, it was shaping up to be everything we'd ever imagined. I felt so lucky to have found someone I wanted to spend forever with. Or so I thought. Then after the new year, something happened that shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about our relationship. It started as an innocent enough moment. We were cleaning out his office, a mundane task, when I stumbled upon a stack of old letters tucked away in a drawer. They were addressed to Heisenberg, and curiosity got the better of me. I opened one, and what I read changed everything. The letter was from a woman I didn't recognize, claiming that Heisenberg was the father of her 7-year-old son. My heart stopped. At first, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding, or perhaps someone was trying to mess with him. But deep down, something about the letter felt too real to ignore. I confronted him, my hands shaking as I held the letter. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Heisenberg froze, his face pale, and after a long pause, he confessed. It was true. He had a child, a son, from a brief relationship before we met. He admitted that he'd known about the child for years, but had chosen not to tell me. His excuse? I didn't want to complicate our relationship. That wasn't even the worst of it. Heisenberg revealed that while he occasionally provided financial support, he had no active role in his son's life. He wasn't involved in raising the child or even maintaining a relationship with him. Hearing this broke something inside me. It wasn't just the secret itself, it was the decision to keep me in the dark and his apparent indifference toward his own child. I was devastated. How could he have kept something so massive from me? We'd spent years together, building what I thought was a relationship founded on honesty and trust. But now, it felt like the life we'd built was a lie. What else was he hiding? What other secrets had he decided weren't necessary to share? As much as I loved Heisenberg, I couldn't ignore the betrayal. It wasn't just about the child, it was about the choices he'd made. Not telling me? That felt selfish. Choosing to stay uninvolved in his son's life? That felt cold. These weren't qualities I wanted in a husband or a father to any future children we might have. When I told him I was calling off the wedding, he begged me to reconsider. He promised that he was ready to be open about everything, that he wanted to bring his son into our lives and make things right. But how could I believe him now? Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. The days after my decision were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. Friends and family had mixed reactions. Some supported my decision, saying I was right to stand my ground and prioritize my values. Others thought I was being too harsh, that Heisenberg's mistake didn't have to define our future together. Everyone has skeletons in their closet, one friend told me. Maybe this was just his way of trying to protect you. But I couldn't see it that way. Every time I looked at him, I saw the version of him I thought I knew crumble. I kept replaying his excuses in my head, hearing his voice say, I didn't want to complicate things. That phrase haunted me. Relationships are complicated, and part of loving someone is trusting them enough to share your full truth. He hadn't done that. Instead, he'd made a choice to shield me from a reality I had every right to know. Now, I'm left questioning everything. Did I make the right decision, or did I let my emotions dictate my actions? Should I have given him a chance to prove he could change, or was calling off the wedding the only way to truly honor myself and my values? Heisenberg continues to reach out, pleading for another chance. He swears he's ready to make amends, to be the partner I deserve and the father his son needs. But I can't shake the feeling that some things, once broken, can never be put back together. Love isn't always enough to overcome betrayal, and trust is a fragile thing. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I deserve honesty. I deserve a partner who trusts me enough to share the messy parts of life, not just the perfect ones. Maybe Heisenberg can change, but I'm no longer sure I want to stick around to find out.
Am I that ass for being hurt about how I found out my wife's pregnant? Life was moving along nicely for my wife and me. At 29 and 27, we had built a solid life together over our 4 years as a couple, 2 of which we'd been married. Recently, we decided it was time to grow our family and had been trying to get pregnant for 3 months. When it finally happened, I thought it would be one of the happiest moments of my life. But instead of joy, I was blindsided by how the news reached me. I was at home in the city where we live while my wife was back in our hometown for a family event. Out of the blue, my friend sent a screenshot to our group chat, a photo from an Instagram story. The post showed my wife crying and hugging a group of friends with the caption, "You're going to be the best mom." My heart sank. This was how I found out I was going to be a father. From a social media post? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was stunned and hurt, wondering how something so monumental could be shared with everyone else before me. I couldn't keep my emotions bottled up. I called my wife immediately. She answered quickly, her voice bright and excited. "I have news, babe," she said, but I was too upset to play along. "I know," I replied flatly. "You're pregnant." There was a pause before she asked, "How did you know?" I told her about the Instagram post and added, "Didn't think to call me first, huh?" She sounded confused and insisted she hadn't posted anything herself. I told her it didn't matter. It still came from her friends, and I should have been the first to know. Then I hung up, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. She called back several times, but I couldn't talk to her. My head was spinning. Then my sister called, telling me there was chaos at my in-laws' house. My wife had locked herself in her room, and everyone else was arguing. My sister promised to figure out what was going on. When my sister called back, she had pieced together what had happened. It started with my wife suspecting she might be pregnant. While hanging out with a friend, they decided to buy some pregnancy tests, all of which came back positive. Overwhelmed, she shared the news with her parents and invited a few friends over to celebrate and brainstorm ways to surprise me. Within 2 hours, the circle of people who knew had grown to at least 10. But then one friend, let's call her Carol, posted the Instagram story without permission. Apparently, everyone had agreed to keep the news private until I knew. When confronted, Carol first claimed she didn't realize it was a secret. Later, she admitted she didn't care and left in a huff, cutting ties with everyone in the group. When I finally called my wife back, she was crying and apologizing. She insisted she had been planning a special way to tell me but hadn't gotten the chance. I told her that if she truly planned a surprise, she wouldn't have been ready to tell me immediately after I found out. She fell silent, and I told her I needed space to think before hanging up again. Things felt raw and unresolved, but I eventually drove to my in-laws' house. When I arrived, my wife was sitting on the sidewalk waiting for me. She ran up and hugged me tightly, apologizing over and over. We went inside, and I told her I needed a nap before we talked. We slept holding each other, the tension between us softening slightly. When we finally talked, she kept repeating that she had messed up and taken away a big moment from us. I asked her to explain what happened, but she wouldn't give excuses. She simply took responsibility and apologized. While I still felt hurt, I could see how much regret she carried. I told her I forgave her, though part of me still struggled to let go completely. I spoke to her friend, the one who was with her during the pregnancy test frenzy. She confirmed that Carol had acted intentionally despite knowing I didn't know yet. The friend reassured me that my wife had been genuinely excited to surprise me and hadn't expected things to spiral the way they did. The situation with Carol left a sour taste in everyone's mouths, but my wife and I started to find our way back to each other. She insisted on couples counseling, wanting me to have a space to process my feelings fully. Her concern and effort helped rebuild some of the trust that had been shaken. Carol's betrayal was a strange twist in the story. No one understood her motives, but she was quickly cut out of our lives. Meanwhile, my wife and I focused on preparing for our baby. Our first doctor's appointment confirmed the pregnancy was progressing well, and for the first time in weeks, I felt excitement instead of hurt. This journey has been messy, but through it all, one thing keeps me grounded: the knowledge that I'm going to be a dad. My sister's words echo in my mind. This is a moment to cherish, not let resentment overshadow. My wife and I are in a better place now, and while this wasn't how I imagined starting our parenthood journey, I know we'll be okay. Together, we'll navigate whatever comes next. After the Instagram fiasco surrounding my wife's pregnancy announcement, things had finally begun to settle. Or so I thought. My wife and I had started to rebuild trust, leaning into counseling sessions that she insisted on, hoping to address any lingering hurt. The pregnancy, though off to a chaotic start, became a bright spot in our lives. It felt like we were on the path to recovery. But just when I thought things were calming down, another storm hit. The friend who had caused the original drama, the one we'll call Carol, was back in the picture. Not directly, but through a revelation that rocked our entire family. The reason for her thoughtless Instagram post wasn't just a careless act of immaturity, it was something far worse. Carol had been having an affair with my father-in-law. We discovered the truth in the messiest way possible. After Christmas, Carol had gotten drunk and sent photos of her and my father-in-law to an ex-boyfriend who had been messaging her. The ex in turn shared the photos with others, and soon the scandal spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before the gossip reached my wife's family and, eventually, us. The details were nauseating. According to my father-in-law, the affair had been going on for 3 years. He claimed that during the first 2 years they only saw each other a handful of times, but over the past year it had evolved into a full-fledged relationship. He had even promised to leave my mother-in-law for Carol. Hearing this made my stomach turn. I had respected my father-in-law, a man I once looked up to, but this? Cheating on his wife with someone half his age, a friend of his own daughter, someone he'd known since she was 13? It was revolting. My wife was devastated. Carol had always been the one joking about how her dad was the hot dad. And now those jokes felt even more twisted. The fallout from the revelation was immediate. My mother-in-law, who had already been struggling with the gossip in their hometown, packed her bags and moved in with us temporarily. She seemed more furious than heartbroken, though. Their marriage had always been rocky, with separations and near divorces in the past, but this crossed a line even she couldn't tolerate. My wife was shattered both by the betrayal and by the added strain it placed on our family during what was supposed to be a joyful time. She confided in me that she didn't know if she'd ever forgive her father. Meanwhile, my father-in-law was trying to downplay the situation, insisting this was a private issue between him and his wife, and that the rest of us shouldn't get involved. At first, he even defended Carol, saying he loved her. But as the backlash grew, he changed his tune, promising my wife he'd cut all ties with Carol if she would just talk to him again. For now, she wasn't ready, and I supported her decision. Carol reached out with what she called an apology, but it was anything but. In it, she admitted that her Instagram post about my wife's pregnancy had been a calculated move, something she did out of jealousy toward my mother-in-law. The explanation made no sense and only cemented our decision to block her permanently. The layers of betrayal kept piling up, and it became clear that Carol's actions had been fueled by resentment and selfishness. My wife didn't respond to the message. She was done with Carol, and honestly, so was I. The woman had already caused enough chaos in our lives, and we had no interest in giving her another chance to create more. Despite everything, my wife and I found ways to lean on each other through the chaos. She was understandably sad and distant for a while, but when I told her I missed her usual affectionate self, she laughed and admitted she'd been using her sadness to score extra cuddles. It was a small but comforting moment that reminded me of the bond we share. The pregnancy has become a source of light amid the darkness. Our first doctor's appointment confirmed everything is going well, and focusing on the baby has helped us shift our energy towards something positive. My mother-in-law has been a helpful presence too, offering her support while keeping things lighthearted despite the tension with her husband. As for my father-in-law, I'm following my wife's lead. Whether she decides to reconcile with him or cut ties completely, I'll support her 100%. For now, my priority is our growing family and making sure my wife feels supported and loved during this challenging time. Our journey to parenthood has been far from perfect, but it's ours. Despite the twists and turns, I'm confident we'll emerge stronger on the other side. After all, we've already survived more drama than most couples face in a lifetime.